Make sure you subscribe to the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. Make sure you follow us on all of our socials and ring the bell so you can stay in the know of this spinoff show and the rest of the spinoff shows that's on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show channel. So 2 days ago, brother Andrew Berry spoke to the media. Yesterday, Todd Monken spoke to the media. It was the first time that both of them had addressed the media since Todd Monken was introduced as the Cleveland Browns' next head coach. Before we get into the details of, some of the things he had to say, you've been around Todd now a few times, hearing him talk. What's your impression of Todd Monken when he speaks?
I think the first thing that comes to mind, Earl, is like how night and day difference he is from his, the previous coach, right? Like he's out there swearing and actually giving you like, I don't want to say like useful information, but like he's answering questions in a way that like is sensible, or instead of just giving you kind of like these blanket statements of, I understand the question, or, we like all keeping it very broad the way Kevin Stefanski did. So I think Todd is clearly a very football savvy guy. And we've talked about this a little bit. Like everyone thinks this is the worst hire. I think a lot of that is just because it's the Browns and people don't trust the Browns. But in retrospect, like this guy's been around football for so long. To me, I think he knows what he's doing. He knows how to build an offense. I think it's worth giving it a shot and seeing what this kind of can look like. And I get the impression that like he's genuinely excited about having the opportunity to kind of take this. I mean, listen, it's his first head coaching opportunity. He couldn't say no, but right. I think he's genuinely excited about like taking this ball of clay that is this Browns offense and turning it into like that vision that he has of when the Ravens were putting up big points on people the last couple of years and all these different things. So I think there's as much as maybe the hire was controversial or frowned upon, I do think there's a lot to like when it comes to Todd Monken and sort of the process he's going through here.
Yeah, I've said this a couple of times, man. I think Todd Monken is a straight shooter. I agree with you. It is night and day from what you get from Kevin Stefanski. He will use some curse words, and it seems like he's very direct. He's more detailed in his communication, giving us real information to lean on, and quite honestly, information that we can hold him accountable for at a later date. One of the first questions he was asked was about the Browns quarterback competition, Spencer, and this is what he had to say. He said, I think it's an open competition. I don't know why it wouldn't be an open competition. I don't mean that saying it harshly, but I don't think there's enough on film over the last couple of years, one way or another, to say, boy, we have our starting quarterback yet, whether that's internally or externally. What did you think about that statement?
I thought it was one of the most telling quotes of the entire press conference, frankly. And listen, there was other things said. He talked about Shedeur, talked about his elite playmaking. He talked about Deshaun and how he's kind of given him the benefit of the doubt that there was once a top 5 quarterback in there. So we're going to hope that that's still in there. We can find that. But I thought that quote in particular was pretty telling because it felt like it was basically a summation of like where this Browns quarterback room is at. Like they don't feel right now, there's not enough on tape right now to feel confident that you have a starting quarterback or you have your quarterback one. And so you're going to have to let this thing kind of play out. I also think it kind of sets the tone for how they're going to go about potentially adding quarterbacks in free agency, in the draft, where, I think they're going to add somebody. I know we've talked about that at length, Earl. It's a matter of who. And I kind of wonder, like, is it worth going for the Malik Willis if it's kind of like, I think Malik Willis is also kind of an experiment, right? Because like we haven't seen him start more than 6 games in the NFL. So it's like, is that really an option for this team right now, given where they're at? And then on top of that, like if you draft a guy, it's another guy you're kind of developing anyway. So to me, like that quote sort of sets the tone for everything that's going to transpire at the quarterback position. And it kind of feels like to me, Earl, it's all roads kind of lead to the guys that are here right now are going to sort of be at the forefront of the competition. And somebody from this group, I think, is probably going to have the best chance to win it, because I just don't know, unless you get Malik Willis or you trade for a quarterback, which I don't think they're going to do. I just feel like that's probably the right way to handle this thing, right? Is like let them duke it out and see who plays the best. And then this year is going to kind of just be about like seeing different quarterbacks potentially and what you have. And then potentially in 2027, finding that actual franchise guy that Todd Monken wants.
Yeah, I think healthy competition, man, it breeds success. healthy competition. Iron sharpens iron is something that you hear me say all the time.
Yeah.
You just spoke on, you believe that the two quarterbacks that's internally might get a leg up on whoever's outside of the building to prove that they could be quarterback one. He talked about Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders. This is what he had to say about Shaduer. He said, I think what you see is an elite playmaking ability that's in him. You've seen it. We've seen it. You saw it in college. You saw it on tape last year. Sure, there's a way to go, but what rookie isn't? I mean, what first-year player doesn't have a long way to go? I'm excited to get started with him and all of our quarterbacks and all of our players. This is another coach who have watched Shaduer from afar. He wanted to recruit Shedeur Sanders when he was the offensive coordinator at the University of Georgia. There's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions on Shedeur Sanders' performance last year and whether or not he showed enough to be given an opportunity this year. When you talk about that elite playmaking ability that he has, and you mirror that with what Andrew Berry said the other day, he felt like that Shedeur Sanders grew from start 1 to start 7. And he said, he has a lot to work on, things like, being more careful with the football, not putting the football in harm's way. But he did say, basically learn how to play in structure, but keep the ability to play, out of structure and still be able to make, explosive plays when things break down. What do you think about what Todd had to say about Shaduer and his chances to open up, the offseason as QB1?
Yeah, I also thought Todd's answer on Shedeur was a perfect encapsulation of what we saw, right? Like, there was clearly something there when he was on the field. There was clearly an element to his game that was better than anything the other quarterbacks on this team had provided that offense. Like, there was a juice to it. There was a spark to it. You didn't see that with Dylan Gabriel. You didn't see that necessarily with Joe Flacco, even though it looked like you might during training camp. And I think that can 100% be true. While also we look at the raw numbers, we look at the advanced metrics, and we see a guy that clearly is not ready at this juncture to be crowned anything. And what I continue to say too, Earl, is like, it's not that he can't do it. And I think honestly, like, Shedeur has it in him to want to be great. So I think he's going to keep working at that. I think he understands he has things he has to improve on. And as long as him and Todd Monken are on the same page with that, I don't see why he won't have at least a shot to, in this competition that they're now framing it as, to compete for it. The question is going to ultimately be like, do they bring in somebody who has more ability, is more experienced or whatever that can beat him out because he's just not quite there? Does Deshaun emerge as that guy because he's played in the NFL for a long time? Those are kind of the questions he's going to have to sort of prove himself being better than and can kind of overcome. But overall, like, yeah, I think Todd's 100% right. There's something to his game that we're all intrigued to see more. But no, he should not be just crowned quarterback one at this point because there's just not enough there yet. And I think people have to kind of be able to wrap their heads around that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Shaduer, I've said all along that no, he's not a finished product. No, yeah. I don't think that he should be just penciled in as the Browns franchise quarterback moving forward. But despite what anybody say, despite what the advanced analytics say and the stats say, in my opinion, when I watched him play football, he was not as bad as the numbers ended up being. And I think that he showed flashes and showed traits of a guy that has a unique skill set that some franchise quarterbacks possess. And, Carson Schwarzenegger talked about how, he was running the defense and learning the defense. And he said, I can only imagine how that is for Shaduer on offense, especially knowing the situation he was in to where he didn't get really many reps. He didn't really get the opportunity early on in the process to develop. So to see what he did within those 7 games, yeah, there were some mistakes and there were some things that he needed to work on, but you cannot ignore some of the good that was in there as well. Todd Monken then had this to say about Deshaun Watson and, of the quarterbacks that's in the quarterback room, when we talk about Monken's system and what he looks for, the key elements or intangibles in a quarterback, I think that we all can agree with the naked eye at his peak, Deshaun Watson has a lot of those intangibles. This is what he had to say about Deshaun. He says, I think anytime that you have a player that at one time has exhibited the skill set at an elite level, I think you're always going to give them the benefit of the doubt that somehow we might be able to get that out of him again. And I think that that's how you should look at every single player. Now, this is interesting because Todd Monken is new to the situation. Jimmy Haslam has come out in the past and said, the Deshaun Watson situation, it didn't work out, essentially alluding to the fact that he is no longer a part of the Cleveland Browns plans. But I do think with a new head coach, you have to keep everything as an open possibility. How realistic is Deshaun Watson's chances to be the Browns starting quarterback in 2026?
I go back and forth on this so much, Earl, because how I feel. Like I don't need to see anything there. If to me, it's a waste of time because he's not part of your future plans. Like we know kind of how this thing's going to end. The owner called it a swing and a miss. Like they're trying to get out from underneath this contract as soon as next year is the goal. But at the same time, I think there is a legitimate truth to the idea that when they're out on the practice field, he looks like the best quarterback out there. And last year, the job was decided because Joe Flacco out of the practice field looked like the best quarterback out there because theoretically he was the oldest guy. He was the veteran. He still has, some juice in his arm. So I think if this is going to be an open competition, he's going to have a fair shot at it because there was an elite player in there at one point that there's still some remnants of, I would imagine. But I think this quote from Todd Monken was kind of wishful thinking, if you will. I just, in no world do I think after twice rupturing your Achilles, the shoulder injury before that, all the off the field stuff, he missed a whole season at that point. He's missed multiple seasons now. Football changes so quickly. If you're here today, gone tomorrow. And if you're out a year, if you miss a couple years, if you're not really on the field, things around you just change. That doesn't mean he can't still read a defense and teach guys and see certain things, and that he still doesn't maybe have a strong arm, or he can't still make some of the plays. But we saw for several years what this looked like with him, and I don't have any belief at this point, 6 years removed from his last good season, that somehow this is going to be salvaged. And so I think Todd Monken kind of has to say this, right? Because he's the coach. He's still on the roster. The Browns are tied to him for at least another season. But do I think that anything's going to be different if he does start? No. I think we've seen what we need to see. But I do wonder about when they're out there evaluating these guys at practice, he could look like the best guy because he's going up against, right now at least, he's going up against two rookies. He's going up against Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel. He should look better than those guys theoretically. And if that's how it turns out, then maybe he does get to start. We'll see if they add anybody else to the room, of course. But so do I think he has a legitimate chance of starting? Yes, because it's an open competition and they might just say he still looks like the best player. But do I think that, to Monken's quote, that guy's still in there? Absolutely not.
So lastly, on the quarterbacks, before we move on to the offensive line, we've talked about Shaduer. We've talked about Deshaun Watson. Todd Monken alluded to that there's a possibility that the Cleveland Browns can bring in somebody from the outside.
Yeah.
And, he was asked, well, how important is it? He said, listen, we're going to do our due diligence, but he didn't really make no guarantees. So lastly, on the quarterbacks, one, do you believe truly somebody from the outside is coming in? And two, would that person be somebody that's a threat to Shedeur Sanders or Deshaun Watson as it pertains to QB1? Or is it a veteran, a journeyman veteran that can come in and just, help with the system and kind of just breed some competition internally, but he's not really a threat to challenge for the starting job, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that quote because I think him saying it's not important, but that they're going to look at everything is notable because I think, again, that frames how the Browns view where they are in the timeline right now, which is they don't feel pressed to figure out their quarterback situation right now. And part of that probably too is, Earl, they have so many other needs, right? Offensive line, receiver. So they can kind of focus on those things first. But I think they know where they're at also because they're talking about on tape. We don't really know who our quarterback is, all those different things. So understanding that I think is important. So yes, I think they're going to add somebody. It might not be important, but I still think they know where they're at and they want to add some more guys to have a competition. If I'm sitting here today, I feel like the veteran backup route is probably the best bet. Mm-hmm. I think if you add Malik Willis, like we talked about earlier, that's probably a move where you're signing him to be your starter, I would imagine. But if it's anybody other than him, I think it is kind of just let's get this guy in here. He can be part of the competition. We can see who kind of turns out to be the depth chart. And if let's just throw out Jameis Winston, right? Like if it's Jameis Winston who Todd Monken coached, okay, Jameis is fine being a backup. Like you've seen him be a backup here before. So you kind of know you have that in your back pocket. So yeah, I lean right now that they're probably going to add a veteran to this group. He'll be part of the competition, and then they'll let the chips fall where they may. Todd talked about, I don't decide those things. The players decide those things. So they're going to let it play out on the field. Fine. And then they sort of punt on finding their franchise guy till next year. And listen, they could draft one. I just don't see the point unless they really think one of these guys I think they know, like after Fernando Mendoza, it's kind of everyone's a project, right? Like if you draft Drew Aller, it's a project. So I just feel like, is it worth it for this coaching staff right now to like tie themselves to any quarterback and be like, we're going to try to develop this guy when you already got 2 young guys there and you might be drafting one next year who's your real franchise guy. So I think they kind of want that flexibility to keep that open. And so I lean that they probably sign a veteran at this point.